DJ LeRoy.
Night Watchman, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I've been sleeping much better since we got a new president.
So you say no anxiety, no stress. It's just gone with 45. That's it, huh?
No. Well, listen, no. We actually have a cascading list of problems that the country has to deal with. So it's not like it's all a magic wand is waved. But I still must say I'm sleeping better.
Absolutely. So in other words, we're no longer in a realm where we just pretend it didn't happen.
Well, we were never in that realm.
Yeah.
we were not invited to that club, and we wouldn't have gone if we were invited. So that's okay. Gotcha.
Well, you know what? We got a great show because one of the things that we're gonna kind of have, we're gonna have some returning guests who are going to be gracing the stage, and then we have also a new one, a virgin to Soul Lounge Primetime. Okay. So why don't we,
get words is interesting, but that's okay.
Hey, let me get it all popping. So
our topic, let's tell our listeners.
Go ahead.
Our topic is cannabis in the Biden era, and we're going to be talking with some true experts. So
absolutely. So our new member coming to gracing us on the Soul Lounge Primetime stage is someone who I consider a renaissance man. He's done it all, from singer, dancer, speech pathologist, a New York City school teacher. We're talking also historical black college. We're talking about Hampton in the house. Mr. Brian Alejandro Scott. What's up, Brian?
Good morning, gentlemen. Everything's fine. How are you?
Good. Welcome to Soul Lounge Primetime, man.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And then our next guest is someone, if we're doing anything as it relates to cannabis, got to have her on, okay? Because talking about being a advocate, being a user, being one who says inclusive, or more appropriately, Cannaclusive, Miss Mary Pryor. Mary.
Hi, ignore the sunlight in this night.
Here she comes. It's queuing. There you go. What's up, Mary?
Hi, ignore the sunlight.
Because this is the night. Yes. And sure enough, our last guest is someone who educated me about the history, about laws, about also the telling me about the many cannabinoids that are also part of the process. And that is Dr. Stephen Robinson, president of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. Come on out, Dr. Robinson. Hey, man.
Greetings, everyone. How are you?
Good. So, Night Watchman, you want to start it off? What's your question of the night?
Well, we start off by saying we're in a new era. We have a new president, and we wanted to get people's thoughts on what would be happening under this administration in terms of its friendliness toward legalization of adult use, its support for medical marijuana in terms of research and really exploring that field in terms of health benefits. And even COVID recovery benefits. So I want to throw it out to whoever is like to give us their perspective on what they see now that we're in a new administration.
Take it. Mary, come on. Take it.
I was going to say the doctor should really go first.
Okay.
Doctor-led answer. So whatever he says, I'm clearly going to say yeah.
You're letting science dictate. I love that. Okay.
Now that doctors are cool again, doctors should take their money. So,
yes. Go ahead, doctor.
Okay. Well, we've got a new administration, but we've got to make sure that the current administration turns a new leaf. Seriously. Individually, I've heard that The history of our current president is one that has not been necessarily hospitable to cannabis. One of the old believers that cannabis was a gateway drug that led to further addictions with more serious drugs like heroin or crack, and following that addiction model and that debunked theory of the gateway. Um, Hopefully, there are more people in his administration that have a more forward-thinking or science-based appraisal of cannabis. And now that he is in the office itself, there's the whole environment with respect to cannabis has significantly changed with
Mm-hmm.
legalization of medical cannabis preceding even the rapid legalization of adult use in many, many states. So it'll be up to their creativity and foresight in terms of how they can deal with a much more progressive attitude. I believe the Congress has passed the MORE Act, which seems to have a number of very progressive provisions in it. I think my esteemed colleague Mary Pryor can talk about more of the specific details of that. But it does at least decriminalize adult use, and works towards expunging prior records that people may have acquired under the former drug wars. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but hopefully, it'll be a new era under this new administration.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Mary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're looking at something where, Biden's administration is going to probably deschedule cannabis to like a 2 or a 3. I don't think it's going to be um, federally illegal. I just don't foresee that given kind of like the makeup of the Senate, the makeup of just like so many other things that I hope he gets to first, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
student loan debt,
Mm-hmm.
healthcare issues, um, the fact that there's still children locked up in these like camps,
Mm-hmm.
shit, that's a little wild. There's a lot of stuff to go back and fix, and try to fix, because I don't. Who knows what this? Who knows what he's walked into now that he's been fully briefed, right? So I don't know what that administration situation is going to look like. Sorry, my work calls are already started. But I think on the New York side, they're just trying to make money so that they don't have this crazy $15 billion debt.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Gotcha.
So I don't necessarily align with all of the things that are in the bill. I think that's a whole other. I think that's a whole other hour-long conversation. I really want to be honest about that, right? But I think cannabis on the East Coast, just given the fact that it's been proven that Black populations and melanated populations are saving this country, just like we did in Georgia, just like we did in Michigan, just like we did in Pennsylvania. If it wasn't for melanated populations voting at the polls and taking over these crazy districts that are crazy racist, America would be a little fucked in terms of Senate and Congress representation. So I hope we earn more of our power back, because we already see the rollback starting with diversity and inclusion stuff across education and commitments from companies to be different based on what happened last year. So I'm more interested in melanated folks being mindful of that game and holding people to task for the promises that they made last year.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Brian, do tell.
Yes. I think basically it's a whole money thing, and until the government finds ways to make money for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
there's always going to be a problem with making it legal. And
Mm.
it always comes down to that. When they were making all this money off of painkillers, it wasn't a big deal. So it was easy for some people to get painkillers. For example, if you were white and you were
Mm-hmm.
female, you definitely got it. I've been in situations where they would just tell me, just take some Tylenol. And I'm thinking, well, my arm's broken here. So it can it that's one thing, and it's very complex. The other thing someone mentioned earlier, Marijuana is not a gateway to crystal meth or
Mm.
heroin or cocaine. And all that is a lot of BS and propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
You also have to look at the fact that many minorities are in jail for very minor offenses for a very long time, and it is based on marijuana sales. So if we
Mm.
start looking at that in terms of, well, we said it was a punishable crime for 20 years for selling a nickel bag, but now we're going to have to say that it's not necessarily that type of crime.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that is why people will be dragging their feet, because they'd rather be wrong than right. I mean, they'd rather be right wrong than correct in terms of what the research shows. Lastly, I would say no one that I know has ever smoked marijuana and then decided to go and take over the Capitol. you know,
Good one, Prime. Good one.
so I don't know anyone like that. Now, maybe if you made the crystal meth in your backyard or in your basement, that could fuel it.
I
Absolutely.
think what's amazing about that moment in history is that I don't know if anyone listens to podcasts. I'm a big fan of the Jesus and Mero podcast.
Oh yes. Oh
That
yes.
moment in history was like watching people fly, because there was so many white folks doing shit where it was like, if I even looked at the Capitol, people were trying to arrest me. So
Yes.
it was
That's what
like, wow, you can do that. It was, I mean, people were smoking weed, actually, Mr. Alejandro, inside the Capitol. So I just
well
want to
that's
I want to keep
I think
cannabis out of the reach of crazy white terrorists, because that.
I like to coin a new word, concierge terrorism. If black and brown people want to be terrorists, we have to do it the hard way, the old
Yeah, we
fashioned
got to
way.
do a
We
lot
got
of
to
work.
do it like MacGyver. The white people way of terrorism is like, well, we want reservations. There are food trucks out there, and they had had policemen to escort them through the doors. Here, right this way. You see the shot of the cop at the end helping the woman down the steps
Yeah.
after she's on her way out. No arrest or anything like that. But can I get you to your car safely?
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. You want some meth
Absolutely.
now? You here?
Yes. You can't make this stuff up. So here's my little question. Uh, uh, Go
Before
ahead.
that, I wanted to just mention that there have been a couple of good signs in terms of the tea leaves that the Biden administration would be receptive, and people have been looking closely at his nominations, and they've been people who have had a history of being marijuana friendly, particularly Dr. Rachel Levine, who's appointed for Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services. So that's what we're getting, is that the his appointees are marijuana friendly. So I think that's a good thing. So I'm willing to give Joe a pass on the statements he's made in the past and judge him by what he does. But I do think we will probably have a better climate than we did. We had kind of with when Bill Barr came in, that put the brakes on all the forward motion from the federal side, and he didn't stay all the way to the end, but after that it just kind of stuck in neutral, and then COVID. So I think now people are looking at the cannabis industry as a possible economic driver to bring us out of this morass that we've come to. So I wanted to bring the conversation back a little bit to our state and
Hmm.
local
Yeah.
presidents. In New York, Governor Cuomo has done something that he did not do in the last couple of years, which was that he added it to his State of the State 2021 budget. He's says the executive budget legalizes cannabis for adult use, and then he actually put numbers to this thing. So he says that beginning in fiscal year 2023, revenues shall first be distributed to the Cannabis Social Equity Fund, $100 million over 4 years and $50 million annually thereafter. And he said that these monies will be used to support individuals and communities that have been the most harmed by decades of cannabis prohibition. So, uh,
Interesting. Interesting.
so so that's I mean, I think that's a starting point for negotiations, but we're finally getting more seriousness because this is something he could have done last year and the year before and didn't. So, Mary, what are your thoughts on from a policy standpoint of where we stand in terms of actually uh, implementing an equitable cannabis program in New York?
Oh boy. I feel like the bill is, you know, different to a degree of what's been presented in the past. I think my big concern is just that what I'm focused on, and this year is very, very different for me in terms of how I'm trying to view educating melanated people with what they need to be able to be in this industry, right? Is I feel like even with all the things that are laid out in this current draft of the bill, we still don't have a way to offer people what they need in terms of education in the space, um, and for them to be successful. I think for myself, I've taken that more as a desire to see that manifest over the past 4 months, which is why I'm excited to announce what we'll be announcing in March. But I think that with the bill, there's still a lot of spaces where equity needs to matter. I unfortunately do not think that given everybody's sensitivities and desires to appease unions such as the police union in the state, where home growth going to go past where it is. And that's an item that unfortunately we might not see change in the city or in New York, period, in the state. I just want to make sure that people are armed to understand why these bill drafts need to be way more amenable to people that are melanated and are of certain uh, class and financial groups, because there's still a huge barrier to entry when it comes to capital and when it comes to being able to access what you need to be able to be in this space. I think that there needs to be a whole redirection of how the minority women in business, the MWBE program in New York, is going to be armed with this. I think that New York is desperate to pass this now. So if people do not ask for what they need in terms of this actually being equitable, we're going to be looking at a way more crazy deficit that impacts people that are, dealing with New York being as progressive as it is, whether it seems that or not. There are a lot of services that New York runs to maintain a lot of different things. So I think that I'm not 100% pleased with the current draft, but it's way different from when we first met each other, like what, almost 2, 3 years ago.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Um,
yeah.
so there can be changes, and I think that that's possible.
Hmm.
Which is I literally have a call with someone who's working on the risk side right now. This brother Jeff Pope, that which I actually need to call back into. Which
Hmm.
is why I'm like, oh, you just asked me a question. I need to actually get this phone call that I have going on right now. But I think there needs to be more opportunities for research and education, and less. Um, I'm just worried about people trying to legalize legal cannabis while still criminalizing red legacy cannabis. That's my concern.
Hmm.
Honest, right? I don't see anything in there where there's like legacy to legal as a pathway for people that have already in the space, right? And it's not
Hmm.
just us. So let's get that out of people's heads. That's just black folks selling like weed. Stop. Secondly, um, I feel that if you only focus on the legalization of that cannabis and you still criminalize items that all of us are aware of that come from localized services, then you're looking at a way to still target black and brown people.
Hmm.
So that happened in Jersey, where they legalized dispensary owned like cannabis, but they are still criminalizing people from the legacy market. I'm not with that. That's my
Hmm.
biggest concern. Um,
Hmm.
Hopefully that's clear in terms of what I feel is the biggest missed opportunity with the bill.
Great.
Gotcha. Okay.
Dr. Steve, from the medical perspective, first of all, How and also I want you to talk about the perspective of what you've seen in California versus what's going on in New York, because I know California did its efforts to have social equity in their program, and that really didn't wasn't what I would call successful. But I also want you to comment on the medical programs and what is the impact of a robust medical cannabis program on adult use legalization.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and in any proposed legislation, however high-minded and high-sounding it may be, the devil is in the details. And I think we need to look at, exactly how all of these social equity programs are actually being implemented. Where does the money go? In California, when they passed the legalization for adult use, Prop 64, there was a lot of lip service talking about one, allowing local control so that municipalities, even though there was adult use, specific municipalities, towns could decide amongst themselves whether or not they were going to allow for cannabis industries to take place in that jurisdiction. There were a number of funds that were set aside to deal with communities that had been disadvantaged by the war on drugs. There were a lot of revenues, tax revenues from the sale of adult cannabis that were actually plowed back into law enforcement.
Oh,
And people complain that the lion's share of those tax revenues went to law enforcement to those communities that had been adversely impacted by the war on drugs. I don't know the details about the actual numbers, but I am in contact with ongoing conferences now that are looking at just now implementing the grant programs that were set up under Prop 64 that go to various communities, neighborhoods, and youth groups in areas that were adversely impacted. And that's just rolling out now. So it's critical that people stay alert, that people pay attention and look at, how these actual programs are being rolled out. Even with the decriminalization, uh, medicinal cannabis was legalized in 1996 in California, and I think it was back in 2016, the Proposition 64 legalized it for adult use, was implemented and started in 2018. And still, people have drawn up statistics where people of color are being arrested for cannabis possession and use 20 times the rate of non-people of color in the state capital, Sacramento.
wow.
And that statistic holds true in Albany as well. And so, that the distinction between quote unquote legal cannabis versus legacy cannabis is still being used to criminalize people of color. So that
Gotcha.
really needs to be watched and fought against. Now, I agree with Brother Alejandro. This is a big money game that's driving the legalization of adult use, and everybody is crowding through the doors at like it was a sale on Black Monday, and we're getting pushed to the back. Everybody looks at money first, and equity maybe third or fourth down the line. But in terms of what's happened to the medical market in California, people realize that the array of medically active cannabinoids and
Mm-hmm.
terpenoids combinations um, is yet to be discovered, and we're making discoveries just on every week in terms of the efficacy of some of these minor cannabinoids for dealing with metabolism, for aiding people with diabetes, for
Mm-hmm.
helping people with neuropathy from various causes. Use particular cannabinoids to help people reduce their use of opiates and reduce anxiety. On all of this is has been driven by a more or less a homegrown medical market and medical research, without the benefit in this country of having the formalized medical research that has been taking place in other countries like Canada, where it is federally legal on the
Mm-hmm.
medicinal end, and Israel and the Netherlands, which has formal medicinal research set up. In California, the onset of the adult use market was a real train wreck in terms of the medicinal market,
Mm.
um, because everyone, those producers were focused now on the mass market, the volume. They shifted their production for adult use, and which made a lot of the niche products unavailable, hard to
Mm.
get, and the
Mm-hmm.
prices were jacked up. And so, unfortunately, there's only a minor dispensation in terms of the tax framework that is sort of a nod to the fact that there is a medicinal strain of cannabis or medicinal channel for cannabis that needs to be preserved. But that preservation wasn't necessarily effective, and a lot of patients have been complaining about not having their particular items available for them or at such exorbitant prices because legalization brought with it a lot of pigs at the trough. Everyone saw the tax revenues, so prices, everybody layered on, licensing fees, excise taxes, municipal taxes, and priced a lot of people out of the market, throwing them back into the legacy market.
Gotcha, gotcha. One of the things that in this particular show, Night Watchman, that I want to do is also explore in terms of, let's say, Brian, in terms of cannabis use, and you've been an advocate for a number of years. So, do tell what are the, let's say, the effects of why you advocate for cannabis and the effects that it has on your overall well being and health.
Well, I think it's very complex. One in particular, cannabis has been used to as calming for many,
Mm-hmm.
and many people of color, whether they be Black, Latino, or different cultures. I would just say non-white, don't tend to go to a psychiatrist or have a therapist every time there's an issue, because if that was the case, we spend more time in the office than we would working, because we deal with racism, inequity on different levels every single day. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say that cannabis usage in terms of um, a way of using meditation, you can
Mm-hmm.
use it in combination. I think it needs to be destigmatized in terms of not being something that you're just trying to get high.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of something that has medicinal purposes, and there is research to show that. But if we start showing that research, number one, many of these super drug companies won't be allowed to sell their Xanax and so many
Mm-hmm.
other drugs that they make millions despite all the side effects, such as, high blood pressure, diabetes, and the
Mm-hmm.
list goes on. It's about 20 to 25 side effects sometimes for one little pill that could cost. And then sometimes your insurance won't cover that pill. So you got to look
Mm-hmm.
at that too. And some people don't have insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So then you get into buying some of those pills off the street, which are also expensive and you may not be getting what you should be getting. So
Yes.
when we look at mental health, cannabis for people of color, I think might be another something that doctors should offer before they offer some of those pricey pills that do affect our bodies in different ways, because a lot of these studies aren't necessarily done on sometimes women, men of color, only certain men of color. So if you're a mixed background such as myself, I might not be in that study, so I don't know if it may work for someone else. I have a rare blood type, for example. So there are a lot of little factors that one has to look at in terms of that. And I think lastly, I'll just say, so I just make sure I get it out there. In terms of information, I think the church needs to kind of step back. I think a lot of people of color tend to be intimidated by this whole cannabis situation based upon religious dogma, misinformation. And really, what is the church's position in all of this? Because they don't pay taxes. So I would want to know why it is they have such an influence on policy making without allowing people to make their own informed decision on getting the information. And I think we really need to look at that as well. It's not mentioned enough.
Gotcha. I see. Well, doctor, please do comment on what Brian said, as well as talking about the research going into the overall benefits of cannabis and cannabis use.
Well, hopefully there'll be some change with respect to research. If there's a change at the federal level, right now it's scheduled as Schedule 1, which means at the federal level there is no medicinal benefit attributed to cannabis. It's in the same. It's in the same category as psilocybin, heroin. That it has no. I mean, even cocaine is recognized as a different schedule because it's an anesthetic that's used in certain procedures, etc. So that has been a major inhibition to the research because it's not that research doesn't take place, but even animal research, researchers have to go through, a C to do the research. And right now, current research mandates that those people who want to do research on cannabis have to get their cannabis from the government farm in Mississippi. And that cannabis is cannabis that was around in the 60s when the farm was established, and there's nowhere near the diversity or the potency of what's available that patients are using currently.
Wow.
Hopefully at the federal level, that shift in the scheduling of cannabis will allow for a greater amount of clinically related research on hopefully in academic centers and not just within pharmaceutical companies, because pharmaceutical companies are realizing that they can't really patent the plant since it's out there already. So they'll try to do some other kind of workaround so that they can get exclusive rights on a certain patent for a slight modification of the compound here or there, even though it may be just as efficacious. And the pharmaceutical companies are in a very kind of two-faced approach to cannabis. Right now, they will lobby strenuously and use all of their resources to lobby against legalization because they realize, and it's been documented in the medical literature, that states that have medicinal cannabis laws on the books have seen not only a 25% reduction due to opiate overdoses, but their state expenditures for all kinds of pharmaceuticals have dropped precipitously. So people are using cannabis for painkillers, for anxiety relief, for anti-inflammatories, for treatments for bowel diseases. And they've been substituting that for the pharmaceuticals in those states that allow, and that's a tremendous threat to all these pharmaceutical companies' bottom lines. That's why they've been fighting against it. But on the other hand, I'm sure that they are also in the dark their own research into cannabis so that when the federal switch is flipped, they're going to hit the ground running with their own streams of research so that they can get on the. And there's got to be a way to again mainstream all of that legacy research that is taking place so that those people who've done their own investigations, those companies compared to pharmaceuticals that have done their own investigations and developed products for common ailments like headaches or dysmenorrhea or stomach. They can get in on the benefits of legalization and not get forced out of the market.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Well, I'll tell you what I have a couple of thoughts relative to what both you and Brian were saying. One is that first of all, I have no sympathy for the pharmaceuticals. They quietly made a killing on opioids over the last few years, and when I say killing, I mean all aspects of the word. As we forgot that the last health crisis before COVID was the opioid crisis that killed probably a comparable number of people over a longer period of time as COVID, although that probably is not going to stay the same. But we also know that a lot of the pharmaceutical resources now are oriented toward vaccines, which is their cash cow now and going forward. So I think that policy wise, we need to, as we press forward for federal and state legalization, we need to make sure that there's a strong research component so that we can really start to dive into the real power of all these cannabinoids in terms of health benefits that it can deliver to us. And the other piece that I thought about listening to Brian is that we need to also make sure that cannabis, medical cannabis, is covered by insurance, so that there
Yes.
is
Yes.
that flow of funds that can support a robust industry and support us in pushing forward more for the medical benefits, because I agree with what you guys are saying, is that it seems like the conversation around medical is seems to be muted as we go toward the whole gold rush that is adult use. And I think we really need to refocus our efforts and make sure that we start to not only understand the power of the medical end of it, but also make sure that that part of it and that usage leads our way into it. It's great as adult usage. Most of the statistics say that even adults that use it quote unquote recreationally usually have a health component toward their usage as well. And so it's not an either or; it's kind of a both. And the fact is that people might enjoy it recreationally, but over time are seeing much important health benefits that we need to start to really dig down and document more than is being done.
Absolutely. And one of the things that kind of I want to harken back to is when I first met Mary, I believe it was at a cannabis forum over at HBA. And you specifically spoke about cannabis use and your own personal journey through the plant. And could you tell me more about that in terms of how you became really a big advocate in the space for its health benefits?
Yeah, and I'm trying to make sure that I use like the right terminology here.
Hmm.
You can't make health claims with the plant, and you shouldn't, right? Just so people are aware. So I was always like a user. Like my family grew up in the music industry on my maternal side. So like
Gotcha.
my mom used to be a singer. My godfathers are all four members of the Stylistics. I know they don't get along,
Oh,
So you can only imagine how awkward that is.
Yes, yes.
But I mean, like on my paternal side, my grandmother used to grow in the backyard, and everybody would be like, "This is weird." Anyway, so like my uncle grows it, so like I because I was very fond of my grandmother, I wasn't using it around her. I wasn't a disrespectful child. Like I was a goody two shoes. But for me, I developed a health issue, and I, thanks to friends, discovered that certain cannabinoids within the plant, not necessarily focusing on THC or CBD, but like THCV, CBG, CBC as like hard concentrates or as RSOs, which is like Simpson oils, were good for my issue. So I was taking like RSO oil and like doing it through my belly button, which is like a methodology of how you can like add it into your system as well. And so that was pretty useful. And around that time, around 2014, where I was flying back and forth to get things because New York at the time when I was living here did not have a market for what I wanted. So I was going to Denver, Colorado like all the time. Around that time, 2015, my mother started getting really, really, really more sick, and she was in long-term palliative care. And she had MS lupus.
Ah, wow.
And so I don't know if people know this or understand the work of Dr. Jack Kevorkian, but when it comes to multiple sclerosis, and he's no longer physically here, but a lot of his patients had like MS, right? And so he was doing like assisted suicides, which is still a controversial conversation, a topic, but the pain with MS in terms of what it does to the body is a lot. So my mom was, we were pretty much accepting that she, things just immediately went down to a decline. So I was going between, I was working at the time full time at a job in New York, flying to Denver and flying to Detroit every weekend.
Wow.
And then I lost that job and then took another job working with Samsung, which was amazing pay, which I needed because I had to be flying to Denver and Detroit. And I was doing stuff for my mom and giving it to her. And at this time, she was in hospice care for the last 2 months of her physical life. And I was giving her heavy like RSO oil with all of the cannabis and everything within the cannabinoid system within that, because fentanyl wasn't working, liquid morphine wasn't working, and she was in pain. And literally for like 2 months of her life, because of that, like she was able to start eating again. She was able to move her fingers again. Her top half of her body had way more movement when she could touch and feel. Her mother was also a triple Leo in the zodiac, so she told everybody that she was using weed in hospice. But I ended up like helping 6 other families because their loved ones were having the same issues.
Wow.
So, if it wasn't for that, and for anybody who would be like, oh, well, is that illegal? I mean, yes, but it's my mother, so I don't really care what you have to say about that. And we can argue all day about that. It's my mom. But I had a lot of doctors that were giving me advice who understood the plant. And, if it wasn't for the stress of that, plus my situation with having Crohn's, which in a lot of states on the medical side allows you to get a medical cannabis, a medical marijuana card. So I have never had an issue getting a card because I have that. But like, if it wasn't for that, and there are studies that point to utilizing cannabis for relief in regards to IBS, UC, and Crohn's. So that is a thing that you can research and see. To be honest, like it's out there. Like it's not like there's there's items out there which I'm sure Dr. Robinson can speak to. And it's been extremely helpful for my level of comfort and pain. And, like I want people to find themselves utilizing this plant for its therapeutic effects before they reach crisis point of their lives, which is
Gotcha.
the 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 movement of you preparing to move on to the next one, or in a crisis moment when you have like stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 cancer. Like I really would like for us to work through a lot of the lies that colonized religion, what I'm using here, colonized religion, propaganda has done to us beyond just cannabis. Propaganda has done a lot to our perception of ourselves as melanated people. Um,
Absolutely.
so,
And, and Mary, and what Brian had said earlier in terms of, let's say, looking at, let's say, melanated folks and their cannabis use, maybe, let's say, precluding them from, let's say, seeking one-on-one counseling, that because of the stress issues that we deal with on a daily basis.
well, I think
Or,
everybody melanated should have a therapist. I've been in therapy for over 10 years, so
okay,
it's
okay.
greatly benefited my life. But I understand that one, there's a barrier to getting that. Two, it's expensive. Three, um, people can disagree with the idea of therapy in a lot of ways, but I do not. I'll say it because I believe this, and a lot of people will say this that agree with me, and people will disagree, and that's totally fine. But my access to therapy wasn't due to the fact that I have lots of money. So the idea that you can't find cost affordable or free therapy has shifted in this time. So if people are not aware of that, I'm always down to help them figure that out. But utilizing cannabis does not replace real needs. So that's why I'm
Okay, that's
always
not what I
very
said.
mindful. Yeah, so that's why I'm very mindful to not say like, if you have cancer, just do this. If you have cancer, go on a fruitarian diet. That's not how that works. So that's why I'm always very mindful to not really tell my story the way that I'm telling it, because I still take like a biologic. I still take Stelara every 6 weeks. I have a,
Okay.
I'm very, very concentrated with my nutrition and my diet. I work out every day. I don't do dairy. I don't do soy. I haven't had sugar since 2012. I haven't had a salad since 2012 because my body can't digest it. I do smoothies. Like, I don't play around. I haven't had beef in 12 years and since 2012.
Okay.
So like,
Got it.
I want people to understand like there's a whole thing that I do for myself to deal with what I have. But I'm always mindful not to say to people like, yo, just smoke this, because I have a lot of friends that have utilized cannabis, especially in 2020. Like I put a lot of people up, and I'm very glad that I'm able to do that. But um, I just think that as we talk about this, we have to keep in mind that this is part of a wellness plan, not
Gotcha.
you replacing it for one thing. And that's why I don't want people that feel like I'm just gonna start smoking cannabis to get rid of cancer. That's not how that works. So I just want if Dr. Robinson can kind of talk about the inclusion of cannabis as a wellness plan. I would be great. That'd be great just for the sake of context.
Yes. Go ahead,
So
Brian.
Yeah,
I want to
Uh,
ask
hold, hold on one second, Brian. You about go ahead.
I just want to address that point. I never said that smoking was going to replace counseling. I never said that. But what I did say
Okay.
is, I'm going to be very clear. I never said that. But what I did say is, when you're a person of color, and especially if you're a man of color, getting a therapist, that's also a process that one has to go through to get the right therapist. Sometimes it has to deal with what therapists are available, their ethnicity, their nationality, their cultural awareness, their education, their familiarity with you as an individual. It's very different from a man than it is for a woman. It's different for a straight person. It is for a gay person. It's different from someone that comes from that speaks a different language. So I'm not saying that. What I am saying though is that sometimes we may not have that option to do all that researching right away. Okay, we may have a family we're raising and a job and other obligations. So I'm not saying it's one over the other, but what I am saying is it should be looked at in a different light in terms of a way to I shouldn't say temporary fix, but at least a means of addressing it with guidance, with professionals. But hopefully you get see, I know for myself, I have a great health plan, but I don't necessarily get doctors that see me as an individual. They just see me
Right.
probably as a poor black person,
Yeah,
and then I'm highly
most people
educated.
don't have good
Right.
health plans,
And I'm
period.
highly educated, so I know what I need to know before I've even gone in that office. I'm concerned about all the people who don't know what they need to know when they go in that office and are
Right.
pushed down a certain road that's not really going to help them. So
Right.
there isn't one answer per se. It is a very complex situation
Yeah.
when we're dealing with medical marijuana, medical treatment, and all the other things that have been mentioned by the panelists today. But I just want to be clear about that.
Okay.
No, and I agree with you 100%. I just think I'll speak from my perspective. As someone that grew up with a crack cocaine addicted father who overdosed on her birthday in March 15, 2007, as someone who grew up in Detroit with not a lot of means, as someone who grew up with her grandmother raising her because her mother was too sick to do it, right? Someone who's grown up very aware that, like, if I wasn't smart, I wouldn't have gotten a scholarship into school. If I didn't play basketball, I wouldn't have gotten to school. And as someone who was aware at a young age, like, what I'm dealing with isn't normal because I went to private school and I was one of 6 black kids and we dealt with racism every day to the point where they changed my grades. So I wouldn't be the top black person that graduated in high school. I'm very aware that there's a lot of stuff because I grew up in the hood of Detroit that affects all of us for all of us. And the fact that we even have StreamYard, we know how to use it, we on the computer, and we are human right now is a sign of privilege, right? We all have privilege in this aspect. But the more that we amplify the privileges and we don't talk about how to help where we are is what I'm concerned about, right? And so I'm more down to tell my story to let people know, like, yeah, like I speak really well, but let me tell you right now, like I grew up with some shit. I will do that to drive home the point. But for me, that awareness, when you're young and you realize things aren't right for you, whether whatever it is, it's important to pay attention to that voice. And I think men ignore that voice a lot, given the pressures that men deal with, no matter what sexual orientation, no matter where they're from. Like the male ego and the idea of being a man is so extra perpetuated, especially within melanated cultures, in a way that I think women of color don't look at or understand in a lot of these contexts. So, with all that respect being held, Brian, you're absolutely right. I just think that the way that we can talk about cannabis as part of a wellness plan overall for ourselves, barring insurance, because insurance ain't held by a lot of us, unfortunately, is a thing that I'm interested in us trying to like do in our own way and publicly, because we are in a pandemic and we are technically in a recession and we don't know when people are going to be able to get out of that. So everybody is finding them ways towards utilizing wild weed, reefer, whatever you want to call it, as a way to cope through what they need to cope through. But that instance of when you like come off of that change of how your brain react, how your CB1 your CB2 receives the medicine, it doesn't eliminate the issue that's still in front of you. So I just want to think about that aspect as well. And yes, Brian, you're correct. So I apologize if I was leaning towards saying that that's what you were saying, but that's what makes it.
Good.
So,
Doctor.
no, uh, I've been waiting 10 minutes.
Go ahead. Yeah, yes. Go ahead, Night Watchman. Go ahead, my brother.
So, my question for Dr. Steve, I want to talk about cannabis as it relates to COVID recovery, which is now
Okay.
probably the opening biggest medical market we're seeing. We know that 10 million people who were infected, and so that means 9.5 million are in recovery. In the last show you talked about cannabis as an anti-inflammatory, and I know from what I've read that inflammation is one of the major challenges that people have in recovery. So I wanted you to speak a little bit on the usage of cannabis in terms of COVID recovery.
Well, that's a very interesting topic. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing a lot of the research that has been devoted to cannabis or alternative medicines vis-a-vis COVID recovery. And I'm sure it will come. Right now, the illness is so devastating that I think people are those people who have access to traditional Western medicine are going to really flock to that avenue to look at the tried and true, FDA approved, even under emergency provisions, to look at standardized Western pharmaceutical medications to deal with this because it is such a devastating illness. That being said, we do know that on the acute phase of the illness, with the aspect that has created the most deaths, the overwhelming inflammatory response to the infection that's caused by what's called the cytokine storm. Um, that is a body's, in fact, an over response in terms of its inflammatory response to being invaded by the virus.
Mm.
There are a number of traditional medicines that are being used to deal with that. Um, uh, Hyperimmune serum from people who have recovered, monoclonal antibodies, and inflammatory medications. Would one venture into that storm with using experimental medicines? Depends on your access. At this point, being the conservative trained physician, I wouldn't chance it. Now, after one gets over the acute phase, there are all kinds of other symptoms that may be caused in terms of um, 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 clotting irregularities, fatigue, and whether or not cannabis has a role to play. I think it's quite feasible, but I couldn't give you any hard information about studies that have been done or even anecdotal incidents of people using cannabis to relieve that. I'm sure there are, and it may be very effective, but I couldn't relay any consistent information about that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
So, Night Watchman, I'm looking at our time. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's about time to wrap up. So I think if we have a few last comments, let's
Mm-hmm.
start with you, Brian, just on your thoughts as we go into this year, and with some hope that we have a more effective delivery of cannabis in terms of both adult
Well,
and medical use.
Mm-hmm.
I think first and foremost, people of color have to stop waiting for people to help them or to
Mm.
tell them what they should do. It's a double-edged sword. Yes, we do need to get the information from what we're told, but we also need to do more research on our
Mm.
own. We also need to look at other natural remedies that may help us as well. And of course, you have
Mm-hmm.
to check those things out with your doctor sometimes because there may be side effects. But when you look at some of the side effects of some of the big pharmaceutical companies
Mm-hmm.
and the medicine they're selling, I would say those side effects I think I'd rather sometimes die of the side effect than what the pill's going to. You know, taking a pill to stay alive, and maybe the side effect will get me before the pill. So we need to look at that. We also need to realize again, and I'm very clear and very strong about this. Black people are not monolithic. We do not
Mm-hmm.
all have the same educational, cultural background. We live in this country, but we're not all from this country. I'm not from this country.
Mm-hmm.
So my perspective might be a little bit different. Doesn't mean better. It just means different. And then taking all of those things together and
Mm-hmm.
forming a coalition of thought. So we spend a lot of time going against each other. I believe this, I believe that. I don't really have any time for that. I can share what I need to share and I can listen to what you have to say. And hopefully, together as a collective group, of people of color, we can find out what are the things that are affecting us the most and what are the things that we can do immediately to address it. So passing a bill may take a year or two, whereas changing a diet, changing habits, going on the computer, looking at natural ways of healing, such as the cannabis, also reflexology, something that's out there, acupuncture, and some of these things may help to a certain degree based upon where you are with whatever situation you're in. So we just need to open that up.
Got you. Got you. Thank you.
Dr.
Thank you.
Steve, any final thoughts?
Well, I agree with what's been said. I think that even in the advent of the lack of solid medical research, I think there is a way for people to move forward with their own research. They should stay in contact, because the body in and of itself has resources within itself that it seems that just the belief alone will unleash that healing power. And so there's always that quote unquote placebo effect. 30% of any drug effect is because you believe it works. and so if you could strengthen that belief, almost anything would work. And there is both the benefit and also the pitfall in that. So that's why the quote unquote objective research is really necessary to try to remove that bias so you can clearly establish whether something works or whether it's just snake oil. Now, if snake oil works and you're sick, by all means.
Gotcha. Good one, doctor. Good one.
Well, we want to thank you all for a great panel.
Yes.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Steve. Thank you, Mary Pryor.
Yes.
As always, this is Soul Lounge Primetime on radio at WHCR 90.3 FM, 7 p.m. on Mondays, on YouTube, premiering at 8 p.m. on Mondays, and now we have a talk back at 9 p.m. on Clubhouse.
And Brian, you familiar with Clubhouse? It's going to be a hoot if you don't know Clubhouse yet. So definitely, and we'll tell Sheila to join us to have a nice little talk back about this show.
Oh, that would be great. That would be great.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you. Long time, man. Dr. Robinson, I think you are frozen in time, but we love you, and thank you for coming on the show.
All right.
There it goes. There it goes. All right.
I don't know what you heard of what I said.
We got it all.
We got it all. So, as a matter of fact, we were just saying that we'll maybe meet again and have a nice little talk back continuation at 9 p.m. on Monday in Clubhouse. All right?
Okay.
All right.